Hi there. I'm Shannon Keebler with Empower Consulting. Thanks for joining me as we learn how to connect fractions to decimals. If I took this dollar and I broke it into 10 pieces, what would each of my pieces be worth? You might say, a dime. You're right. Let's count how many dimes make up $1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If we took our dollar and we replaced it with this image, it's a dollar, it's broken into 10 sections. We know one section is called a dime. What is another name for this part of a dollar? What might you be able to call it? You might be able to call it 1/10. It is 1 out of 10 pieces. You might have said it looks like this, 1/10. It is 1 out of the 10 pieces. It's a tenth of a dollar. It's just 1/10. You might also have said it's $0 and 1 dime, which means it's 1/10. So if we write it as a decimal, you can tell here that I have my ones place, and I have my decimal point to say we're getting less than 1, and now I have my tenths place. My tenths place is otherwise known as my dimes. So I can write it as 0 and 1/10, and it would look just like this. Let's say them together. 1/10, 1/10, 0 and 1/10. But what would happen if I took my dollar that I broke into 10 pieces and I took now this dime and I broke it into 10 pieces? And then I took this dime and I broke it into 10 pieces, and I took this dime to 10 pieces, and this dime and this dime and this dime. What if I took every dime and I broke it into 10 pieces? What coin would I get? What would its value be? Would it look like this? Now I have $1. It's still broken into 10 pieces, but every dime was replaced with, you guessed it, 10 pennies. So now I have 10 pennies and 10 and 10 and 10 and 10. Let's count to see how many pennies are in $1. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. So if I look at the shaded part, you would see that this is still called 1/10. It is a tenth of a dollar. But I can still call it 1/10 of a dollar because it's still 10 of 100. It's 1 of the 10th, 1 out of the 10. But I would actually call it also 10 out of 100. It's 10 100ths. The reason it's 10 100ths is because it's only 10 of the pennies out of 100. I would also say that I could call this single penny something. This single penny now is what is called 1/100th. If I were to write it how I say it as a fraction, you would say it's 1/100th. So if I'm talking about the entire shaded part, it's still 1/10 or 10 hundredths. If I talk about just 1 penny, it's 1/100th, which is why you can see how the entire shaded part is 10 hundredths. If every penny is called 1/100th, 100th, 200th, 300th, 400th, 500th, 600th, 700th, 800th, 900th, 10 hundredths. 1 penny is called 100th. It's called 1/100th. And how do you think we would write it as a decimal? There's $0. We haven't filled up a whole dollar. It's less than 1. We get a decimal point. It doesn't make a whole dime yet if I'm just talking about 1 penny. So there's 0 dimes and there's 1 penny. If we labeled this, we would see we have our ones our tenths, and our hundredths. Let's read this number. 0 and 1/100th, which is the same as 1 cent. 1/10, 1/10, 0 and 1/10 is the same as 1 dime. Look what happened next. Now, I took my entire dollar. I still have it broken into 10 sections. I took every dime. I broke it into 10 pennies. And now you can see I have 100 pennies. And then I decided to take my 1 penny and I took it over here and I chopped it up and I broke it into 10 pieces. So now I want to know what is just one of those 10 pieces called. Do we have a coin for that? We don't. We would call it 1/10 of a penny. We could call it a part of a penny. So now, if I took this penny and I broke it into 10 pieces, and this penny, 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 how many would be in the entire dollar? Well, if I just did this row, we would have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, because each of these were broken into 10 pieces, and 10 times 10 is 100. If I did 100 here, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. So if I want to know what this one piece of the penny is called, we would call it 1,000th. We would label it as a fraction, 1,000th. We could write it as a decimal, $0. We didn't fill up a whole dollar yet. 0 dimes, 0 pennies, 1 part of a penny, 1/10 of a penny, which is called a thousandth. Let's do our place values. Ones, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Let's read it together. 0 and 1,000th. Otherwise known as a part of a penny. We don't have a coin for that, but we can call it 1/10 of a penny. Or we can call it a part of a penny. Let's read them together. 1/10, 1/10, 0 and 1/10. 1 dime. 100th, 1/100th, 0 and 100th. A penny. 1,000th, 1,000th, 0 and 1,000th. A part of a penny. 1/10 of a penny. Now that we know tenths, hundredths, and thousandths, let's see what happens when we put some together and how we can find equivalent fractions and decimals. Let's look at what changed. Now I have 2/10 covered in. So I would say it is 2/10, 2 parts out of 10. Or what if I called them, this is 10 100ths, this is 10 100ths, so now I have 20 hundredths. I could either say I have 2/10, 1/10 plus 1/10 if I am talking about the entire row as a dime, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 10. If I'm talking about the pennies, I'm saying there are 10 out of 100. There are 10 out of 100. So this would be called 2/10, which is 2 parts out of 10, or 20 hundredths, which is 20 parts out of 100. They would be equal. 2/10 is really the same as 20 100ths. And we know that to be true because if I were to use 2 dimes, how many pennies would be in 2 dimes? We would have 20. So then we know that $0 and 2 dimes, which is $0 and 2/10, is the same as $0 and 20 pennies. But we would say 0 and 20 hundredths. 0 and 2/10 is the same as 0 and 20 hundredths. Remember, a hundredth is a penny. 20 pennies and a tenth is a dime. 2 dimes is equal to 20 pennies. Look what changed. What do I do now? How much do I have? Look closely. Let's label what we have. We know that if we see these as tenths, I have 1/10 plus 1/10, but wait, I don't have 10 here. How would I label it? So instead of labeling it by tenths, because I can't call this a whole tenth, what if I labeled it by 10 100ths, 10 100ths, and instead of 10, I have 5 100ths. So now you can see that I have 10, 20, 25. The portion I have shaded is now 25 hundredths. It's 25 of the 100 parts. 25 of the 100 parts. But how would I write that as a decimal? Let's say it how we read it. 25 hundredths. 25 hundredths. We have $0 and 25 hundredths. Tenths, hundredths. What would it look like in money? It would look like 2 dimes and 5 pennies. Yes, we could use a quarter for this as well. Let's write this as 25 cents, or 0 and 25 hundredths. If I wrote it as money, it would look like this, or like this. Let's read it. 25 hundredths, 0 and 25 hundredths. $0 and 25 cents, or 25 cents. I could also write it as decimal addition. This row or this column is 0 and 1/10. This column is 0 and 1/10. This column is 0 and 5 hundredths. It's 5 pennies. 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 5 hundredths equals $0, 2/10, and 5 hundredths. 0 and 25 hundredths, which is the same as 25 pennies. How many 25 hundredths could I get from an entire dollar? If you said 4, you're right. If I were to break this up, and now I have 10, 20, 25, so I could label this 25 hundredths. 10, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I now have 25 hundredths. And if I were to label this, 10, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would have, let's fix that one, 0 and 25 hundredths. So if I would have wanted to label this section as a fraction, you're right, I could label it as 25 100ths. But you could also look at it as equal pieces. How many equal pieces do you see now in my dollar? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all 25 hundredths, which means 25 hundredths is really the same as 1/4. We know that a quarter is 1/4 of a dollar. So if we put 25 cents here, 25 cents here, and 25 cents in both of these, we get $1. And 25 cents is 1/4 of the dollar. The 1 out of the 4 pieces. That also equals 25 cents. It's 1/4 of a dollar. Let's see what changed. We have more filled in. Let's find all the ways we could name what would be shaded. If this is an entire dollar, let's see what happened. I see tenths, and I see some broken into 500ths and 500ths. So let's label it first by decimals. I see 1/10, 1/10, and here I see 500ths and 500ths, which is the same as 1/10. I see 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, and I see 500ths. What does that equal? Let's count. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 7/10, and 500ths. 0 whole dollars, that would be 7 dimes, and 5 pennies. 0 and 75 hundredths. 75 hundredths is the same as 75 pennies or 7 dimes, if these are all dimes, and 5 pennies. $10, $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $71, $72, $73, $74, $75, which is equal to 75 cents, or $0.75. I could also write it as a fraction, 75 hundredths. I could also write it as another fraction if I look at my equal parts once again. How many parts are shaded now? 1, 2, 3. I have 3 parts shaded out of how many? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know that 75 hundredths is equal to 3/4 of a dollar. That would be like 3 quarters. And we know there are 4 in a dollar, but we're only counting 3. That's 75 cents. That's 0 and 75 cents. That's 75 hundredths. That's 3/4 of a dollar. We would say they are all equivalent. What happened? Let's see. We have 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10. Oh, not all the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not 5/10. That would be 5 dimes. 5 pennies is 5 hundredths, 0 dimes, and 5 pennies. What do you notice that equals? 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, 10/10. And we know that 10/10 is the same as 1 whole. We know that 10 dimes equals $1. We know that 100 pennies equals $1. It equals 1 whole. And now we have extra. We have 1/10, 2/10, 5 hundredths. So I now have one whole, and I have 2/10 and 2/10 and 5/100ths. And 5 is in the hundredths spot. Ones, tenths, hundredths. 1 and 25/100ths. I read the whole number after the decimal point. 1 and 25/100ths. So my 10/10ths equaled the one whole, but altogether I had 10/10ths, 11/10ths, 12/10ths. So I could have written it as 12/10ths plus 5/100ths. 1 and 25/100ths. I have 12/10ths. 12 of the 10 parts. I have 5 of the 100 parts. I hope that was helpful. Would you take a moment, please, to like, comment, share, or subscribe this video? It'll help others to see it just like you. Don't forget to visit at www.empowerlearngrow.com, where you can find resources to support this video.